Okay, so I wanted to share with you a video from the Green River trip that I did at the beginning of this month. I didn't do a ton of filming, so here I am doing a bit of a voiceover in order to tell more of a story with the footage that I did capture. We'll start at the beginning. It was a group of 4 of us paddling the river. One person from our group was driving down, and myself and the other 2 were flying down from Toronto. So from Toronto, it took 3 flights to get to Moab. We flew from Toronto to Chicago, Chicago to Phoenix, Phoenix to Moab. Moab is a very small airport. Keep in mind, you do need to arrange a shuttle beforehand. That was something we kind of overlooked, and we were waiting in the airport for quite some time because there was only one taxi in town. So our travel day started at about 2:30 in the morning when our airport shuttle picked us up, and we ended up getting to Moab at 4:30 p.m. Moab time, which was 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we were traveling for about 16 hours. We were pretty exhausted and we weren't done. We had to go grocery shopping to buy all the food for our trip and organize all the food that night in order to be ready to get to the outfitters the next morning at 7 a.m. So it was a very long day for us. We handled it pretty well, I think, because we were just really excited to be there and to get on the river. So we rented some gear from Texas Riverways. They also provided our shuttle to and from the river. So when we got to Texas, we kind of reorganized a bit of our gear, got ourselves ready. They have a whole shop inside, and I couldn't resist. I had to buy myself a map, even though I already had 2 maps ready to go. I had to buy myself a Canyonlands river guide map book, which I'm really happy that I had. We were getting a shuttle with another group, so we had to wait a bit for them to arrive. So while we were waiting, we filled our water jugs. You can rent water jugs from Texas Riverways, and they provide you with drinking water because the water in the river, it's very silty. You can filter it, but because there's no portages, we could also just bring jugs of water, which was really cool. So once the other group was there, we gathered around our shuttle driver, and he did a bit of an orientation with us. He went over where to meet the shuttle and how to prepare to meet the shuttle at the end of the trip. He educated us on the vegetation along the river, and he explained that life jackets actually aren't mandatory on the Green River, but they are on the Colorado, so we did have to bring some with us. And then the last bit of information was the most important, and it was how to go poop. So we do have to bring this river toilet with us. Texas Riverways provides that for you. It's basically a metal box that has a hole in the top that you sit on and you poop in. The lid does seal on and screw down for transportation because you do have to load it into your canoe every day and bring it with you. The nice part about having a river toilet is that you can have the best view from the pooper. So that's kind of fun. Once we were done the orientation, we were on our way. It was about an hour drive from Texas Riverways to the put-in, and it was really cool because for the last little portion of the drive, we were driving on a canyon road, very similar to the road into the Stikine, which we paddled last year in September. So it was very familiar to me, but I was glad that we weren't in charge of driving, and I really trusted our shuttle driver. He did a great job. We were on a small bus with a trailer and a bunch of canoes. We made it down to the bottom of the canyon safely. We even drove past a few old cars that looked like they didn't really have the same luck that we did traveling the road. Once we made it to Mineral Bottom, which was where we were starting our trip, we unloaded all our gear and said goodbye to our shuttle driver and got on the river.
There you go.
Further down, I guess. My paddling partner and tent partner for the trip was Dee. I actually met Dee because she started the BIPOC Outdoor Gear Library in Guelph, and we did a collaborative event last year. So that's how we met. So she's actually the one who invited me along on this trip, which I'm very thankful for. We were on the river by 11:30 a.m. and only had to paddle 13 miles before picking a spot on the river to call home for the night. 13 miles, or 21 kilometers for us Canadians, didn't take us very long given the pace of the current. We were able to stop and enjoy a hearty lunch on a beautiful beach site and didn't feel rushed at any point to push on. Our lunches for the first few days were wraps with kale, cucumber, tomato, salami, cheese, and hummus, which was delicious and something that I've never had on trip before. I've never considered bringing such fresh produce with me. So this really kind of changed my perspective, and it's opened up a whole new world for me. The first evening we found a beautiful campsite on River Right at about mile 39. It had a nice beach entry for swimming, which was a must on this river because the days were just so hot. And it had the perfect perch to take in the scenery. We actually ended up calling it the balcony. We went for a dip in the river to cool off and then ended up eating tacos with some dehydrated taco meat that Dee had prepared, and we topped them with kale, tomatoes, and cheese. Again, another delicious meal. On the morning of day 2, we ate oatmeal with some slivered almonds and berries before packing up camp and getting on the river. We traveled past Potato Bottom, Beaver Bottom, and Queen Anne Bottom, taking in the beautiful surroundings. The Canyonlands is at the heart of the Colorado Plateau. The plateau is a vast highland with an average elevation of 5,000 feet, incorporating portions of the Four Corners states. Beautiful red rock blankets the Colorado Plateau, and Canyonlands is no exception. More than half of the rock sequence exposed throughout this region is either red, white, or varicolored sandstone or shale, with the remainder commonly being gray or white limestone, gypsum, or conglomerate deposits. I'm reading this from the Canyonlands River Guide that I just couldn't resist buying. We were singing Colors of the Wind from Pocahontas. Admittedly, I was not singing because I don't know the words. And in part of the song they say, "And you'll never hear the wolf cry to the blue corn moon." And right when they were done singing that song, we came around the bend and we saw a rock that looked exactly like a wolf howling at the moon, which was really cool. We were all kind of freaking out for probably longer than we needed to be. We pulled over at Bonita Bend for lunch, which is right at the basin of an abandoned meander on the river. Over time, the river had shortened its course by 2 miles by cutting off this big hairpin turn in the river. We took some time after lunch to walk up the old riverbed and explore a bit. It was really beautiful. After lunch, we pushed on, keeping our eyes peeled for cliff dwellings as marked on our map. Our unofficial guide, Adriana, who has paddled this river before, thankfully pointed them out to us because they were hard to spot as they blended in quite well. At some point in the afternoon, we passed a guided river rafting group who asked us where we were camping and specifically asked us to leave one of the 2 campsites at mile 25 available to them because they were a pretty big group. And so, being the gracious people that we were, when we came across the first campsite, we checked it out, decided that it was absolutely beautiful and perfect, and that we would leave it for the group because they were quite a large group and it was a large site and we could take a smaller site. So we moved on. We checked out the other site that they had referred to, but there was no shade at all and the access was kind of challenging, so we pushed on. Unfortunately, we didn't realize that that was the last site for another 4 miles or so. So we ended up paddling later than we wanted to, and when we got to the next site, there was somebody already camped at it. They graciously allowed us to join them. Their site was kind of connected to other sites through short little trails. So they were fine with us portaging our stuff back to one of the sites along the trail, which was a beautiful spot. There was a nice opening for us to cook dinner and hang out. We had some fun playing euchre, and that night I was in charge of making macaroni and cheese for dinner. So it was a nice night, and I ended up staying up late to take pictures of the night sky. Day 3 brought us past Horse Canyon and Jasper Canyon, where we stopped for lunch. We took some time to discuss where we wanted to camp and take a day off to do a hike, because at this point we were already at mile 13. It was between the site that we were currently on eating lunch or the site that was at mile 7. The Jasper Canyon site had little to no shade, and the access to the water wasn't the best for swimming, but it did have a lot of trails throughout, and it was the site of the ruins, so there was a lot of stuff that you could explore. The site at mile 7 was the spot that Adriana had camped at in the past and had fond memories there, so she was hoping that regardless we could at least stop there, whether it's for lunch or camp. But in the end, we all decided to push on to mile 7 to make camp and take a day off there. The guidebook listed a really great hike to the confluence of the Colorado and the Green River, so we thought that would be a really cool hike to take on our day off. When we made it to mile 7, we were super happy with the decision we made, because it turns out that the access to the water was great for swimming, and there was a gigantic boulder flanked by 2 massive trees that provided the perfect pocket of shade for us to hang out in. And depending on where the sun was in the sky, we could sit on either side of the boulder. So it was perfect, and we actually called it the oasis because it almost looked out of place next to the rest of the campsite. That night, Adriana made us pizza for dinner, which was a nice treat. She even made the dough, which was really impressive. The next morning, we set out on our hike after eating breakfast burritos made by Sarah, which were delicious. You'll notice the theme is delicious meals on this whole trip. Our goal was to get to see the view of the confluence of the Colorado and the Green River. The map said that it was about a 3-mile hike one way, which is about 9.6 kilometers there and back. Most of it was kind of on top of the plateau, but of course, in order to get to the plateau, we had to climb up and up and up. It was very steep and a little treacherous at times, but it was a nice challenge and just a nice change of pace from being on the river. And actually that day we just happened to get a bit of an overcast and windy day, so it wasn't too hot to make the trek. I think any other day on this trip we wouldn't have done it because it was just that hot. Once we got up to the top, travel was a little bit easier, but up on the plateau, the cryptobiotic soil is plenty, so it's really important to stick to the already worn trail. Cryptobiotic soil is identified by its black, crusty, knobby appearance, and it's found throughout Canyonlands and the surrounding desert. This living soil is composed of cyanobacteria, lichens, mosses, and green algae. If damaged, it can take years and even decades to recover. This protective desert covering discourages erosion and supports other vegetation by storing water and nutrients in the soil. So we made sure to follow the path as best we could. We hiked as far as we could before we needed to turn back. We wanted to ensure we made it back to the campsite before dark. So we picked a nice lookout to enjoy a view of the Needles and a few snacks before making our trek back to our tents. Along the way, we saw lizards, lots of different cacti, a little cafe with a spine. Oh, it's not a cafe. A little cave with the spine of an animal in it, which was pretty cool, and a ton of cryptobiotic soil. That evening, Sarah made us ramen noodles, which we topped with a boiled egg, sugar snap peas, carrots, and broccoli, which again, delicious. The next morning, we packed up camp and prepared for our last day of paddling on the river. We said goodbye to our oasis and set off for the confluence where we would meet our shuttle the next morning. Since we didn't have to travel far, we spent most of the day rafted up and just letting the current move us at its own pace. We were sad to say goodbye to the Green River as its waters converged with the Colorado. We kept our eyes peeled for a good campsite, checking a couple here and there because we didn't want to get swept into the raging rapids that were only a few miles downriver. We managed to find a beautiful spot to call home for our last night on the river. We swam, played cards, and had a lot of good laughs before calling it a night. We were scheduled for pickup at 10 a.m. the next morning, and we had to make sure all our gear was packed and organized and the canoes were cleaned out by the time the shuttle got there. Luckily, Adriana had done this before and took on the lion's share of cleaning out the canoes the previous evening. Once our shuttle arrived, we were loaded up pretty quickly and had to pick up one more group across the way before the 2-hour jet boat shuttle up the Colorado River. Once we were back in Moab, we shuttled ourselves and our gear back to a hotel where we showered and organized our gear to prepare for the flights home. We enjoyed dinner in town that night and reminisced on the highs and lows of our adventure. The next morning, we said goodbye to Adriana, who had to drive west, and prepared ourselves for our long travel home. I'm so grateful that I was invited along on this adventure. I don't think I would have ever really considered traveling to this area had I not been invited along. So I'm so appreciative of that. After paddling it and having an absolute blast, I realized that it would be the perfect family canoe trip because there are no rapids, no portages, no bears. The bugs were fine at this time of year, and the weather was incredibly beautiful. So maybe Jim and I will have to plan a trip back there with the kids. We'll see.